Necessarily express the views or opinions of Equity Media, its management, staff, or affiliates of WBOK.
Good afternoon, New Orleans, and welcome to Put Housing First. I'm your host, Andrenica Morris, and we are here, as we are every Tuesday, to talk about what it means to put housing first. Thank you for joining us on this gorgeous Tuesday afternoon. It is beautiful outside, which is really nice after the week of weather that we had. I'm sure people who have plants in yards were maybe happy with last week's little deluge. Although I was wondering about if the ground was going to get too saturated, if that was going to be a problem. But it's over now. And we even got one of my favorite things after a rainstorm, this cool front moving in, even though I refuse to turn my heat on. And I'm freezing as a result. But also when we talk about these weather shifts, these patterns, it always comes to my mind, and it's something we always want to make sure we're talking about here on Put Housing First. What happens to folks who are housing insecure or unhoused, and everybody in between that, right? People who are living pillar to post, and frankly in housing that's substandard, and to our neighbors, our friends, family, and neighbors who are on the streets of New Orleans. And given everything that's going on, we have a really great show for you today, and a really great guest today, because we are going to be talking about there's a Homeless Action Day, and our guest today is a frequent contributor to the show, Joe Herremuller. Joe, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Andrenica. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Back again. You've been on a couple of times. I think you're at the point we call you a frequent guest and contributor to Put Housing First.
Well, I feel honored, and it's like always. It's really good to talk with you because, like you, I'm very passionate about housing and housing justice and trying to make sure that everybody get a home.
Yeah, that's right. So I wanna let's get started. So one, you normally have a different hat. This week today we have you coming on in your capacity as coordinator for a relatively new initiative. We've been around for a while, the Louisiana Advocacy Coalition on Homelessness, right? That's relatively new.
That's right. It's less than a year old, but we're a group of homeless service providers, continuums of care, people with lived expertise in homelessness, and other housing justice advocates from across the state of Louisiana.
That's right. And and this is one of the issues that we talk about all the time when we talk about Put Housing First, when we talk about housing for all. This is one of the pieces that I'm really proud of, how we've worked with you and the folks at Jane Place, and there's so many other partners, the Fair Housing Action Center over the years, Unity for Greater New Orleans. There's so many people, too many to name, but also how y'all have led the way to make sure that folks understand that homelessness isn't something separate from housing justice. It without addressing the needs of the unhoused, we can't really get to housing justice.
That's right. Yeah. And one of the reasons that we have so many people experiencing homelessness, and not to say that Louisiana is the worst. In fact, we have one of the lowest per capita rates of homelessness in the country. But still, for anybody experiencing it, it is a serious crisis. And it stems from the high cost of housing in large part.
That's right. I think that's something that people miss a lot of the times. It's one of the issues when we talk about housing justice and things like housing for all. It's something that people miss because, and frankly, it's my opinion, and I think we can prove this by now, is that a lot of folks miss it because they're scared, right? They kind of know in the back of their mind, especially in places like Louisiana, in places like Southeast Louisiana, where we've all experienced some level of homelessness in the last 20 years, right? We've all been unhoused either by hurricane, by power outages, or by financial strain. and so many people, and I think this is why the people in this community are a little bit more sensitive to it, because I think you're right. We're certainly not the worst, despite what our leaders keep trying to pull. But our leaders, especially over the last few years, haven't you been like really pleasantly surprised? Especially like we've had some really crazy things pop up over the last couple of years, and people introducing legislation to stop folks from feeding the homeless.
Hmm.
And the people showed up and said, "What you doing? What y'all doing?"
I think as you point out, I think a lot of folks in our communities have had firsthand experience, whether that's having lost or nearly lost their own home and their housing stability, or knowing people and their families or their networks that have
That's
gone
right.
through this. This is something that touches many people in our communities. It's much more common than you think. The good news is that most people who experience homelessness, it's a very short-term thing. It lasts maybe for a few days or a few weeks, and people are able to, claw themselves out because of their resilience
Right.
out of that. But it gives us all a taste of that, of what it could be like for those folks for whom, because of their disability or their financial situation or other things that are going on in their life, that they're not able to get out in that short term, and they can really languish for a long time without housing supports, without stabilization services that are able to kind of clear the other things out of the path, so that when they are in housing, they're able to stay in housing.
That's right.
And we know that does work. It's not that we are blind to see that new people don't become homeless
Right.
with regularity, but we do know that for folks who are able to get that housing assistance and the stabilization services, over 90% of those folks stay housed and don't become homeless again.
It works.
It
And-
does.
And part of the reason this coalition was stood up was because not only do you need to support the folks on the ground, right? We didn't want to name everybody. I started naming, checking people. I'm like, I got to stop because I'm going to forget somebody, because there's so many service providers, so many people who do this work day to day. It is truly an amazing system that that is out there to serve people all across the state. And our continuum of care isn't the only continuum of care, even though I got predisposition towards our continuum of care here in New Orleans, the Metro New Orleans area continuum of care. But we've got great partners, right? Like the Arch.
We do. All across the whole state,
That's
from
right.
Shreveport to Slidell, from Monroe all the way to Sulphur. We cross the state. There are 7 different continuums of care when you talk about those networks of homeless service providers who make sure that the people who are vulnerable are navigated to available housing resources, that oversee homeless service programs that are governed by the federal government. And those continuums of care make sure that those services are available. And we've got 7 excellent continuums of care across our state. And those continuums are made up of networks of large and small nonprofit organizations doing, the Lord's work in very difficult circumstances. And what a lot of people don't understand is that these networks have to leverage local money, local funding in order to earn the right to provide services. They're not able to get high on the hog. They actually have to bring in more dollars to match what the federal government is providing to do these services.
That's right. And that's one of the key pieces around why this coalition exists, is this collective advocacy, right? That we
That's
need
right.
to be able to stand up. And last year it was put into stark relief why we needed, a statewide group that was focusing on the needs of the advocacy needs around homelessness, right? We had to fight off several bills last year that sought to criminalize homelessness, which has already happened in a couple of our municipalities, but they were trying to make it statewide.
Yeah, and that's criminalization, in other words, subjecting people who are unhoused, unsheltered, to having to be arrested or cited, going to court, has become in vogue in some places. We've seen it in some other states, some cities here and there. But it just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it.
Right.
And beyond the moral concerns that some folks have with citing or jailing folks who crime is really related to nothing more than their poverty when it comes to just sleeping outdoors, it's also counterproductive.
Right.
We know that they slapping folks with fines when they don't have money to pay rent, that, putting people behind bars when they're trying to get to housing appointments or trying to get to their jobs, it makes it harder to get housed. It makes it harder to be employed, and it makes it harder to do anything of daily life that is necessary to get themselves to the place that they want to be at. Because let me tell you, people who are unhoused, they want housing.
They want housing. Again, I mean, that's one of the things that I'm glad you said that, because we do need to make sure the listening audience hears this, right? Again, most of the WBOK listening audience is going to have that sensitivity because in the last 20 years, they have found themselves housing insecure, so they get it. But we also know that sensitivity can be used to make people scared, to make people afraid, to make them think, and certainly for them to be less generous with their friends and neighbors and family members, and to look to blame, right? And that's where I think a lot of this push to criminalization comes from, is I'm afraid that I could find myself there. It's the oldest adage in the book, and it's rooted in so many beautiful things about community. There but for the grace of God go I, which should promote empathy and sympathy and action on your part to help that person. But instead, there but for the grace of God, you can turn it the other way and go, yeah, that's right. I was smart and I was disciplined, and that person was clearly weak, and look for those distinctions and then seek to punish. Well, if they've done something wrong, logic says that they need to be punished for doing something wrong. So you get to that place where, and I feel bad looking at them, right? I feel bad. And there are, we're not going to pretend like everyone's interactions with the unhoused is something out of a fairy tale, right? You have people sleeping in backyards. You have people sleeping in abandoned buildings. But again, that's the work of the COCs. And you all have done some extraordinary work over the years, getting those numbers down so that there's less people sleeping in abandoned buildings for their own safety as much as anything, right? Helping people get off the street, and being available. If someone finds an unhoused person in their yard, they can call Unity or one of the partners and say, hey, can someone come and talk to this person, right? Instead of calling the police.
That's, our providers, and not just in New Orleans, but our providers across the state, the continuums of care provide outreach to folks, and they do that either through a variety of outreach organizations. I know in New Orleans we've got a City of New Orleans outreach team as well. So, there are people willing to reach out to people. The question is, are there available housing resources? And we know that on any given night there are fewer available housing resources than there are people who need them. But we have to stay in touch. We have to know our community. We have to know the population of folks that are experiencing homelessness. We have to know their vulnerabilities so that we can find those, not who are going to be the easiest to house, but really the folks who are the most at risk through their homelessness, the least capable of resolving their own homelessness. And so we can help them resolve their cases, because it's a humanitarian crisis for them, and we've got to make sure that we're using the public's resources in a reasonable and effective, prudent way.
Right.
When there are public dollars involved, and we know when it comes to shelter, and we got to distinguish between shelter, which is short term, and not that people don't have a right to, and housing, which is a place where people have a lease or they pay a mortgage or they have a right to be there, and it's permanent. We know that people want housing. Not everyone's going to go into a shelter, and even if they would, we don't have enough shelter beds anywhere in any community in Louisiana to meet the need on any given night. But we know that we need more housing as well. But I'd love to tell you about our policy goals for this year that the Louisiana Advocacy Coalition has.
Let's move to that because we want to make sure folks understand the history and how we got here and why we need to do this.
Yeah, thank you. The Louisiana Advocacy Coalition is telling folks this year that the time is ripe to get it right. And when we say ripe, we mean reducing barriers, increasing access, preventing criminalization, and evidence-based solutions. Those are our priorities from a policy perspective. We're sharing that with policymakers because we think that those are the things that have been proven time and again to work to end individuals' homelessness, and when done on scale, can reduce homelessness in communities as well.
Right. So we've got the legislative session. We've had a couple of guests on. We kicked off this year with couple legislators, former legislators, kicking off the session, talking about what's going on and what they expected to see. Insurance and and of course what's been dominating the conversations are what's happening with our court systems. Some of the conversations that are being had, some of these distractions, unfortunately, that some of our legislators are practicing instead of focusing on the main issues. But and of course, voting rights is a big topic this session. Homelessness is also on the agenda once again, right? And so we've got some positives, right? There's some good bills, and there are some challenging bills. And tomorrow we are having we're having an advocacy day on the Capitol, on the steps of the Capitol, right?
That's right. Yeah, the Advocacy Coalition is going to hold a rally. We won't be doing that on the steps because the steps are under renovation. But in the Capitol Gardens in Baton Rouge, we'll have advocates from across the state gathering to rally at 12:15 outside the state capitol. And some of those advocates will be at the sessions, hearing from legislators, being able to table in the rotunda and talk to folks about, what are the evidence-based best practices? What are the things, the interventions that really work? And what do we know about homelessness in Louisiana? What have we seen? What are the trends? And what could we expect with where we see things going? And there is a lot of moving parts, as you point out. There's a lot going on, and our legislators have a lot to decide on. But that's why I think it's important for housing advocates, experts in the field, to carve out some space to talk to policymakers and help them understand better where things are going, where they're headed, what they are like in our communities.
Right. I mean, it's an interesting time that we're in right now, as there are so many threats to our ways of life, right? Our way of life, and we have to. I think we're confronted with these choices every day. Is whose side are you on? And instead of looking for blame, what the members of this coalition are talking about is how do we solve these problems? Because I think one of the things that you said, Joe, that's so important is no one wants to be unhoused. No one wants to be without housing. Yes, there may be mental illness, there may be addiction that causes behavior that makes it problematic for them to stay in housing. That's not the same thing as not wanting it. And that's right. I wish we would stop talking about. I mean, we have to talk about those obvious answers, but we need everybody to understand that those are stereotypes, and you should not be writing policy. You shouldn't, and you certainly shouldn't be implementing law to deal with stereotypes.
No, nor basing it on anecdotal incidents or one-time situations that people's interactions, because we know a lot of folks have interactions with folks who are homeless, and that's good. We want more of that, in terms of like folks who are doing volunteer things, but that's not the basis of policy.
That's right. That's right. So tomorrow and one, we need to give folks some information, because if they still want to participate, they can, right?
Yes, they can. We've got I think they're welcome to come on down to the Capitol in Baton Rouge, which is on 3rd Street, and join us at our rally at 12:15, or come to our table in the Capitol Rotunda, which will be there from 8 a.m. on tomorrow morning.
And so but it's too late to sign up for. There's no transportation or anything like that being.
Unfortunately, maybe fortunately, we've managed to fill all of the spots, all the transportation.
Ooh, that's great! That's fantastic.
So
that's fantastic. So it's not that transportation isn't being provided; it's you waited too late to decide. But but you can participate in other ways. People can they can email their legislators. They need to be emailing their legislators, and our partners. Both Unity and Fair Housing Action Center have you guys both have portals in order to get people to get to their right legislators, correct?
The Fair Housing Action Center has a portal that they have been sending folks through to let them know, let their legislators know about a variety of concerns, and so I think that they have something that is broadly available. I would hope that it's available through their website. I haven't looked immediately this morning.
Okay. So the Fair Housing Action Center, people can send comments to their legislators and let them know what they feel about this. You can, if you're in Baton Rouge and you can make it down there, and there's going to be a lot of our partners who are going to be at the legislature for their own business. We encourage folks to come on by if you're in economic justice or environmental justice, criminal justice reform, education, healthcare, all the social justice guys, the organizers assemble and meet in the legislative garden, the Capitol Gardens.
That's right.
To help support. And also there should be other folks showing up too, our friends, the home builders, because there's a narrative, and Joe, you and I have talked about this before. There's the big narrative nationally about how we need to address the affordable housing crisis, and unfortunately, it is best characterized as build, baby, build. And even the most well-meaning of folks kind of push on that. And we know that here in Louisiana, it's a little different. It's actually a lot different. While we do need investments in quality housing, there is actually enough housing available to house everybody who is counted as being unhoused on the point in time count could actually find an occupiable home today if they could afford it, right? If they could, if they had the money, if they had a voucher, if they had a first-time homeowner program, if they had the support to go in, there's enough vacant homes.
Absolutely. If they had a higher wage.
If they had a higher wage. Say it again for those in the back, Joe. If they had a higher wage.
There's a variety of things that go into being able to afford housing, and some of that is, what is the housing priced at, and then the other is, what are you bringing to the table? And part of what we can do to support people is making sure that, because a lot of unhoused people are wage earners. Many unhoused people are wage earners in our communities, and if they could support themselves on their earnings, wouldn't that be a good idea for our communities?
Yep, that would be. I mean, and again, that's what we. that's our whole thing. It's like we need to put this system in place that you all are a critical part of. You're actually, one of the parts of the system that is actually functioning and operational. But you also are a really good example of what we do in this country is we build these excellent systems and then we underfund them.
Mm.
We don't give them all the things that they need because, like, y'all listening to me and Joe talk, there is actually enough vacant apartments of appropriate size and location that every person who is counted as unhoused in the point in time count, and we're going to go back to that so we can explain to the audience what that is again.
Sure.
At the point in time count here in New Orleans, if they could call, if Joe and his partners could get in touch with those landlords, and they actually are talking to these landlords every day.
That's right.
They're talking to these landlords every day, and they're trying to make the connections. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough resources. And to your very excellent point that bears repeating, the folks themselves, many of whom are working. I think the people, not again. I think there's, like I said, I know there's a sensitivity around it for the people who the people of New Orleans, the people of Metro New Orleans, and even of Louisiana. But I think the average American is often shocked to learn how many unhoused folks hold down not just part-time jobs, full-time jobs.
It's a lot. It's a lot of people.
And this is where the math comes in, right? The fact that the minimum wage in this country is $7.25 an hour. There is nowhere in the United States where $7.25 an hour allows you to rent a one-bedroom apartment.
Mm-hmm.
Nowhere. Nowhere. The math doesn't math. The market, and again, for everybody who's going, well, they should work harder. So they should work harder than having to work 40 hours a week. They should work harder than that. And when you talk to people like that, they're kind of like, okay, well, and again, when you're having conversations with people about businesses and, well, we can't pay them more. Okay, then what you want? You don't want them. You want them to work harder. That means getting 2 jobs, 3 jobs. And then when you show them the math that if in order to have enough money to afford in Louisiana, to afford a one-bedroom apartment, you need to work about almost 2 full-time jobs, making $7.25 an hour.
Mm-hmm. It's almost an impossible task. I'm going to give you a statistic, Andronika, and this comes from Housing Louisiana, and it's published on a recent report by the Louisiana Interagency Council on Homelessness, which is a statutory body that the state established 3 years ago. But 86% of households that are considered extremely low income, that means 30% or below of the area median income, and in any city, there's always going to be somebody who's in the bottom 30%, right? In any community, any state, that's how percentages work. 86% of those folks in our communities are spending over 50% of their income on rent. And some of them are spending darn near 100% of their income on rent. And that's the type of situation that can lead to homelessness. It is that sort of precarity. And if we could work to address that inflow, then that means fewer people coming into homelessness, and that the resources that exist for people experiencing homelessness could be stretched farther.
Right.
And people are not languishing as long, that they don't need as much intense services when they do become homeless, because we've addressed through other means the easy cases, and we've saved the resources that we have that are precious for the hardest cases for those folks. And there's not a lot of people in the middle that are falling through the cracks, which is the situation that you have in so many communities right now.
So, yeah, like the math doesn't add up. And again, that does not make these folks unworthy. That does not make them somehow failures. It means that the market is not working correctly, because it should afford everyone the opportunity to have housing. These folks don't even have the opportunity. That's what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that the housing doesn't exist. It's not that they don't have the desire for it. It's that the opportunity is completely out of reach, to quote our friends at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. It's
Mm-hmm.
completely out of reach by any reasonable standard, by anything that's possible in the universe that we occupy. People should not have to work 2 jobs to keep the roof over their heads. If they have a full-time job, it should pay a living wage, and there should be housing available for them at that wage. That's how this should work. And I think folks get caught up in, again, this is where the work that this coalition is so necessary, Joe, to pull everybody together and as a super group for everybody to come together and talk about this issue and to talk about this advocacy, not to separate it from housing justice work, but to make sure that all of us understand the nuance and the parts of it that are just black and white.
Mm-hmm.
One of the parts that's black and white, we're going to keep hammering this point home. And I've had to have these conversations with people. I'm still shocked that in this century, in the 21st century, that human beings will say out loud, well, not everybody wants a house. Not everybody wants housing, right? Because folks are still stuck on this. And it's really amazing because it's a stereotype. It's an anecdote that hasn't been, we used to see it on TV, right? Like you used to see people like, that was most famously, I think, probably embodied by the likes of Howard Hughes. Most people don't even know who Howard Hughes is anymore, right? That this notion that people who are wandering from place to place, living simply, not necessarily caring about the quality of the housing that they're in or things like that, but because they're doing it because they're secretly rich and they have mental illness. What? I've actually heard that. I've actually heard that people say that when you see people panhandling, you should be careful because a lot of those people have plenty of money.
There, but for the grace of God, go I, is
That's
all
right.
I can think about. If somebody is, if somebody's in a situation, that's what I can think, and I tell myself it gives me an opportunity to help other people out.
Right. That's right.
There is a feeling, maybe it's growing in our society, that everyone's a scammer and they're out to get you, and no doubt the incidences where that occur, give us mistrust. But I find it hard to believe that everybody who's poor out there, because we know there's a lot of poor folks, economically poor, that is. There are some folks who just that just happens, and I don't think we need to focus on in terms of our shaping our minds around a big policy issue on the sort of outlier or exceptional, astounding, or salacious stories. That's not the sort of solid footing that we want policymakers to be thinking about, that everyday people in the street even need to center when they're considering the most important issues. And housing is one of the most important issues to any of us because it's a survival question in our lives and in our day-to-day.
Right. That's right. So, Joe, we've talked a little bit about some of the things that are happening in the legislature. There are specific bills out there that we want to make sure that folks know about, right? Let's get into that, right?
Sure.
Because we've got to make sure we talk about the legislature. We've already talked for over 40 minutes, so.
Well, there's a lot that we can say, and we're
there's
both
always
passionate
a lot
about this
that we
subject.
can say. There's always a lot to say. There's always a lot to talk about. But we always want to be disciplined.
That's
and I
right.
have this list that I've been given So I
Okay.
want to make sure we get to the list. And, thank you and Brandon, our deputy director at the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance, for putting this together. So one of the good bills we want to make sure we're talking about some of the good bills out there. I think and Delisha Boyd has also introduced a piece of legislation around minimum wage. She, like
Mm-hmm.
many other legislators, keep introducing it year after year, and we'll figure it out. But she also introduced HB 712 that has passed unanimously, and it would waive fees for people experiencing homelessness and fleeing domestic violence when it comes to getting a state ID. How critical is something like that to the
Oh,
work that you all do?
I mean, you can imagine what it's like if you are trying to, get a job, sign a lease, do a background check, handle any of your other business. You pretty much need a state ID. And unfortunately for folks who become unhoused, keeping track of your papers can be very difficult. Establishing them to begin with can be very, very challenging if you don't have your papers in line, or if they've expired. And so we think that clearing away those barriers, reducing them, is a really important part of making it more easy and accessible for people to get into their housing. And state ID is one of those things that we're really pleased to see HB 712. And it did, like you said, it passed out of the House unanimously. We hope it has some real solid legs, and we'll be continuing to watch that. And it's not an expensive thing to do, to say, hey, people who are experiencing homelessness, people who are at risk because of their income level, people who are fleeing domestic violence, they should have access to that standard form of identification that we all use in our daily life, and that the cost shouldn't be a barrier to them being able to get into housing. We'd love to see something similar like that done for birth certificates as well, because we know that that's also a really important form of identification.
And one quick question is, how does someone have to have proof that they're homeless? They get something from a local agency, and they will take that with them to the DMV. The mechanics.
The DMV, the bill has a provision where folks could establish their homelessness through a shelter or service provider, or because they are living below the poverty line, and they have documentation to show that.
Oh wow!
And they could use that to get a waiver on the fee.
And recognizing that that's something that for someone who is housing insecure can push you over the edge. It might not be about the cash. It might not be about getting the cash together at that very moment that you need to make sure that you have that identification, because your lease is being renewed and it hit exactly at the wrong moment. And I think this is something that most people are familiar with, right? This cascade effect that can often feel overwhelming. I don't know about anybody else. I bank with Capital One, and they're changing out our cards, and it's coming at the worst possible moment, right? Especially when it comes to things like you've got automatic bill pay set up, and so you're like, oh, I got to swap all of this stuff over. And it's not like it's not something that you have to do. You do routinely have to do this kind of stuff, right? But if it's coming with you've been traveling, or you have an unexpected bill because you're off from work, there's a holiday, right? Those things start to stack up, and you may not often have the cash to do those things.
People shouldn't be losing their home behind stuff like that.
Right.
And this is not going to solve all the problems that we have, but it's about clearing the path, reducing the barriers, clearing the path so that people who are unhoused, people who are fleeing violence. Sometimes people have to flee with nothing but the clothes on their back.
That's right.
And that's a situation that is a very critical part of what the homeless service providers across the state do, which is to help provide the housing and stabilization services for people fleeing violence.
Right. That's right.
And whether there's violence or not, regardless, we want to make sure that people are getting a clear path, and we think that HB 712 is an important part of that.
Well, and the fact that it would also help the working poor,
Mm-hmm.
right, who can income certify to their financial distress, and again help keep them housed. This is the kind of thoughtful legislation that we like to see, and it crosses the whole spectrum. It truly becomes a people oriented policy.
That's right, and it seems to have gotten support across the political spectrum as well, at least up to this point, and we hope that it will continue to move along because smart, thoughtful people on both sides of the aisle can see the value in that.
Right, because yeah, you could go to the DMV. It's bad enough that the challenges about our Office of Motor Vehicles have had over the last couple of years, from the hackings and things like that. Um, it's not the best. It's not fun, but they're doing a serious thing over there. This is not a small thing, and sometimes the bureaucracy can just make you feel just completely hopeless. And then if you don't have enough cash, right? If you can't afford to do the thing, that's even I think that's in a lot of ways it makes people feel even worse. So this is great piece of legislation. Glad it's moving really well. Folks should, if we talked earlier about reaching out to your local legislators, and we have people listening that put housing first across the state because people listen online in addition to listening on the radio. Call your legislators, and thank them, or your your state house reps, because all of them actually voted for them. They often hear from us when we're angry with them, when they're irritating, when they've done some things, and we're going to get to that in a second. But this is an opportunity. I would encourage everyone to thank your state rep for voting affirmatively for this, because every single one of them did. So no matter who you are and where you live in Louisiana, I'm urging you to thank them for voting for HB 712, because this is going to be this could be the thing that tips the scales for someone fleeing domestic violence, for a working class person who just needs a little bit of help to get to the next step, right? And someone who has experienced what I think is one of the most devastating traumas inside of our current society, a disaster that people face on the daily, losing their housing.
Mm-hmm. It is very traumatic, and I think that like you said, this is one of those pieces of the puzzle that we worked them to put together,
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to see that that's moving along.
And so then we've got to talk about the problem child. With HB 211, this is the bill that would talk about criminalization, and that would allow penalties up to 2 years in prison. Sweet Jesus. Um, for people sleeping outside, or having bedding in a public place. And we're hearing that there may be some changes around some of that language, because that just don't make no sense. Even though I don't think we've talked about this. Unfortunately, we've had this problem. We've had some of this spring up in other places, like you said. In Baton Rouge, they have criminalized camping, right, inside of city limits. They're special. They're special.
Yeah, this legislation looks a lot like a piece of legislation that appeared before the Senate last year, and this time it's in the House. But it's going to have a hearing this week. In fact, on Thursday, it'll be heard in the House Judiciary Committee at 9 a.m. We know that this bill's it seems very ambitious. It's got 4, 5, 6 different things that it's trying to do. The advocates for it are saying, hey, this would create a homeless court system. It would help resolve homelessness in our communities. But we can read it clearly, and we can see what you pointed out, which is that creating a novel crime that punishes people with serious jail time, 2 years, imprisonment at hard labor, and a $1,000 fine is the maximum penalty on second offense. But there's a minimum penalty of a year imprisonment for people on the second offense. So that's a minimum of a year incarceration. And there's nothing in the bill that leverages new housing resources, that proposes new supportive service opportunities for people. It strictly creates hoops for them to jump through if they've lost their housing. It suggests that they will be oriented to existing services, but we know that the existing portfolio of services have not been sufficient to get everybody housed thus far. So this is not an approach that is based in the evidence. Quite to the contrary, it's based on stereotypes and inferences that experience does not bear out.
Right.
Criminalization is counterproductive. I'll say it again. Criminalization is counterproductive.
Counterproductive, completely.
It makes it harder for people to get their affairs in order, to stay housed. I mean, if you've got charges, are you going to be more likely or less likely to be able to secure a lease with a landlord who's maybe concerned about who's coming into their properties? If you've got to spend time in jail or going to probation, how is that going to affect your ability to make it to your job?
Right.
Make it to your medical appointments? Probably not. It's probably not going to help you in a positive way. So these are just the basics when it comes to thinking about how do we help folks get housing? Well, we get them housing, not lock them up.
That's right. I think that's the part that and we're gonna have to wrap it up soon, Joe. We got about 3 minutes left. But I think this is the part that people struggle with, is when you and I and other members of the coalition talk about this, there is a level of disbelief that we could guarantee housing for all. And I think that is one of the big challenges, right? Is that folks are like, we can't do this and they tell themselves that, again, because of those stereotypes. It's like, something's wrong with those folks. That's why we can't do this. And it's like, no. That's not what we're talking about here. It's like, what we're talking about is math and money, and alignment of resources that are being and taking down the impediments, like people, not having access to IDs.
That's right. And just making sure. Yeah, I don't think everybody understands that the federal government knows what the need is for housing, and they fund only 25% of that need for housing.
To fund it.
And yet there's money for other things that we're hearing about all the time. Things that don't improve people's quality of life, things that detract from the quality of life of people in other countries. And I think that what we need to see is greater investments at every level in the things that we know work: housing and supportive services that augment people's lives and that allow people to do for themselves what they already want to do.
That's right. So with that, we'll go ahead and wind things down a little bit. Let's recap for everybody really quick tomorrow. So tomorrow, the Louisiana Advocacy. Oh, Lord have mercy, I'm saying it wrong. Tomorrow.
So Louisiana Advocacy Coalition on Homelessness is hosting a statewide action day with a rally at 12:15 p.m. in the Capitol Gardens.
There you go. There we go.
Please join us.
Thank you so much. And so we're having everybody come out who can join us. If you're on the bus, we'll see you out there. If you didn't make it onto the bus, oh well. We'll
come next year.
Come next year. But if you're there on other business, swing by, see the folks, see everybody, and talk about this. And I can't urge you enough. Write your legislators and thank them for supporting this really great first step piece of legislation that got out unanimously, HB 7112. And then also tell them that HB 211 is not good, that you don't want to have people who are housing insecure, who are just like you, your neighbors, your friends, your families that you don't want to be treated this way, and no one else should either.
That's right.
There but for the grace of God. That should mean something, especially this week to folks who and no matter what your religious, and minds are certainly more agnostic. It is also a prayer for some thoughtfulness and some reflection and some empathy. And even if you don't believe that way, it still works to just say, hey, no matter what God you follow, or you don't follow a God at all, there but for the intervention of something else, you would be in that circumstance. And again, the people of Louisiana know that.
That's right. The time is ripe, as we're saying, to get it right. We're going to reduce barriers, increase access, prevent criminalization. And why? Because we have evidence-based solutions.
That's right. What things that we know will work if executed and funded.
That's right.
And not just hopes and dreams and wishes, not just, and again, not just blind faith in the goodness of the downtrodden, right? We're talking about professionals who understand that they are dealing with folks who have experienced severe trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And realize that needs to be met with care, not carelessness.
That's right.
All right. Well, Joe, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with us. We're going to have you back later on in a couple of months, maybe even before the end of the session, hopefully. Maybe we can celebrate some more good news.
That would be great.
That would be great. We'd love to have you on.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for being here with us this afternoon. Jahir Mueller with the Louisiana Coalition for Advocacy on Homelessness. And me, Andronika Morris, on WBOK 1230 AM. Y'all take care of each other out there, and we'll be back next week live on WBOK 1230 AM.